Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
All right. We were on page 90. Could you read that one, Hyperion? A something and other and an other.
Yeah.
Or do we need a recap? Anybody?
Something and other are. Sorry.
All right.
They
So-
said they're ready or no?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Quick recap.
Sorry. All right, sure.
So, quick recap. Existence is, the unity of being and nothing. This unity is, as being that existence is determinateness, because it is nothing taken up into the form of being. So existence and determinateness are kind of synonymous, if not fully synonymous. I'm not quite sure. There's existence in general, which is kind of determinateness in general as well. And as that, we have determinate being. In the determinate being, however, we have this strange issue of the determinateness is. And as we have already found out in the course of the logic, being has resulted in that it is existence. So anything that is likewise exists. So determinate being therefore itself exists. Existence in general itself exists. That's where you get the split into the mode of being, of quality, which is reality, and the mode of nothing, which is negation. That fleshes out the internal determinations which we can make about determinate being at this point. So we have then qualitative being. In qualitative being, we obviously have then existence. And we get from that the concept of being in itself. Why? Well, you have existence within existence. It's pretty logical. Existence exists in itself. This totality, however, is what Hegel starts by calling the term something, which is the mode of determinate being or qualitative being, which is in the form of existence, which it is. It is the form of the affirmative, which is existing being as opposed to non-existing being. So the something is taken only in the form of its reality, that is, it's only ascribed its complete positive form. Hegel does mention something interesting. He says that something is the first negation of the negation, or at least it makes itself appear to be, because it exists in itself. That is, it negates its own negation and fully affirms itself within itself. But this is not actually explicit at the beginning. It's something that it can't yet claim, even though it makes itself appear to be so. So something as the affirmative, therefore, negates its negation, expels it from itself as if it was something other to it, and therefore the other arises as this other, which is the non-being of something, as if something was just the pure positive being without including this other non-being. So, makes sense. Right. I guess start with like the B finitude Hyperion. It's right above it.
At B? Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, okay. A. Something and other. At first they are indifferent to one another, and other is also an immediate existent, is something. The negation thus falls outside both. Something is in itself in contrast to its being for other, but the determinateness belongs also to its in itself, and the determination of this in itself in turn passes over into constitution, and this latter, as identical with determination, constitutes the immanent and at the same time negated being for other, the limit of something which is the immanent determination of the something itself, and the something thus is the finite. In the first division, where existence in general was considered, this existence had, as at first taken up, the determination of an existent. The moments of its development, quality and something, are therefore of equally affirmative determination. The present division, on the contrary, develops the negative determination which is present in existence and was there from the start only as negation in general. It was then the first negation, but has now been determined to the point of the being in itself of the something, the point of the negation of negation.
All right,
Ready
continue.
to go on? All right. A. Something and other. Something and other are, first, both existence or something. Second, each is equally an other. It is indifferent which is named first, and just for this reason it is named something. In Latin, when they occur in a proposition, both are aliud or the other, the one, the other, alias alium. In the case of an alternating relation, the analogous expression is alter alterum. If of two beings, we call the one A and the other B. The B is the one which is first determined as other, but the A is just as much the other of the B. Both are other in the same way. This serves to fix the distinction and the something which is to be taken in the affirmative sense. But this also expresses the fact that the the distinction and the privileging of one something is a subjective designation that falls outside the something itself. The whole determination falls on the side of this external pointing. Also, the expression this contains no distinctions. Each and every something is just as good at this as any other. By this, we mean to express something completely determinate, overlooking the fact that language, as a work of the understanding, only expresses the universal, albeit naming it as a single object. But an individual name is something meaningless in the sense that it does not express a universal. It appears as something merely posited and arbitrary for the same reason that proper names can also be arbitrarily picked, arbitrarily given, as well as arbitrarily altered. Anything to say about this so far?
I guess an important thing to note is what he says, but an individual name is something meaningless in the sense that it does not express a universal. So something is actually originally not a concept. It's just a name. The distinction of something and other is not a conceptual distinction. In fact, it's just a name we give to two things that we think are different.
So we know which one we're talking about, as opposed to the other, right?
Yeah.
Because something is something and an other, because it is always an other to its other.
Yeah, so actually the real concept is the other, the real operative concept.
Yeah. Otherness thus appears as a determination alien to the existence thus pointed at, or the other existence as outside this one existence, partly because the one existence is determined as other only by being compared by a third, and partly because it is so determined only on account of the other which is outside it, but is not an other for itself. At the same time, as has been remarked, even for ordinary thinking, every existence equally determines itself as an other existence, so that there is no existence that remains determined simply as an existence. None which is not outside an existence, and therefore is not itself an other.
All right, so where he says the other is not the other for itself, the third in that relation which determines something other as others is us, and this otherness is outside of both. They're not the other in themselves. They're not self-othering. This distinction is completely external. The comparison itself is completely external. And that's not how we should be thinking about it. What we're going to want to think is how something really is the other from within, and how the other really is the other from within as well.
All right. Both are determined as something as well as other, thus they are the same, and there is as yet no distinction present in them. But this sameness of determinations, too, falls only within an external reflection, in the comparison of the two. But the other, as posited at first, though an other with reference to something, is other also for itself apart from the something. Third, the other is therefore to be taken in isolation, with reference to itself, has to be taken abstractly as the other. The to etopov of Plato, who opposes it to the one as a moment of totality, and in this way ascribes to the other a nature of its own. Thus the other, taken solely as such, is not the other of something, but is the other within, that is, the other of itself. Such an other, which is the other by its own determination, is physical nature. Nature is the other of spirit. This, its determination, is at first a mere relativity, expressing not a quality of nature itself, but only a reference external to it. But since spirit is the true something, and hence nature is what it is within, only in contrast to spirit, taken for itself, the quality of nature is just this, to be the other within, that which exists outside itself, in the determinations of space, time, matter. The other which is such for itself is the other within it, hence the other of itself, and so the other of the other. Therefore, the absolutely unequal in itself, that which negates itself, alters itself, but it equally remains identical with itself, for that into which it alters is the other, and this other has no additional determination. But that which alters itself is not determined in any other way than in this, to be another. In going over to this other, it only unites with itself. It is thus posited as reflected into itself with sublation of the otherness, a self-identical something, from which the otherness, which is at the same time a moment of it, is therefore distinct, itself not appertaining to it as something.
Okay, then. This last paragraph basically just is the pre-given summary of like what the other reveals about something, which is that something is the other of itself, that this self-otherness is the actual being of otherness. The other is the other of itself, and thus mediates itself. It is identical to itself and non-identical to itself, in unity with itself and in direction to itself, which, as you can see, this reveals the structure of exactly what a dialectic reveals. Except now it's explicit. It couldn't be said in this form within being and nothing and becoming. You can speak of this self-othering, but the other explicitly, for the first time, shows this process of becoming other, and in becoming other, becoming nothing but what it already is. As for the example of nature he gives right before that, where he says, such an other, which is the other by its own determination, is physical nature. Nature is the other of spirit. This, its determination, is at first a merely relativity expressing not a quality of nature itself, but only a reference external to it. So, when we say, well, nature is the other spirit, it's like basically thinking that nature and spirit are two completely distinct things that, that are in themselves what they are without relation to each other, that this comparison is merely an external comparison. But since spirit is the true something, and hence nature is what it is within only in contrast to spirit, taken for itself, the quality of nature is just this, to be the other within, that which exists outside itself. And that's something he explains further in the philosophy of nature, which is the spatiality of nature, the spatial dimension, which is literally the way in which the idea exists outside itself, the way in which an idea can externally relate to another idea. And this external self-externality of the idea is also curiously part of the idea. It is an idea itself, but it is the other of the idea, and is within itself the other of the idea, but is only other because it is the other of the idea, therefore within the idea, as you can see how this whole thing goes in circles. So we can continue unless there are questions.
No questions? Going once? Okay, I guess they don't have any questions. The something preserves itself in its non-being. It is essentially one with it, and essentially not one with it. It therefore stands in reference to an otherness, without being just this otherness. The otherness is at once contained in it, and yet separated from it. It is being for other. Existence as such is an immediate bare of references, or it is in the determination of being. However, as including non-being within itself, existence is determinate being negated within itself, and then in the first instance an other. But, since in being negated it preserves itself at the same time, it is only being for other. It preserves itself in its non-being, and is being. Not, however, being in general, but being with reference to itself, in contrast to its reference to the other, as a self-equality in contrast to its inequality. Such a being is being in itself.
Alright, hold on. So here it seems that the full speculative movement has to be from the going from determinate being as qualitative being, as expelling the other from itself, so negation as if it were outside it. The first speculative move beyond that is not being in itself, but rather being for other, that it is itself by negating the other, by negating its negation. But it is only in virtue of this negation.
Yeah, being for others, the first relation between the something and the other.
Yeah, and so after that, then we get being in itself.
Yeah. Because the somethings confront each other as others.
Alright, continue.
Alright. Being for other and being in itself constitute the two moments of something. There are here two pairs of determinations. One, something and other. Two, being for other and being in itself. The former contain the non-connectedness of their of their determinateness, something and other fall apart, but their truth is their connection. Being for other and being in itself are therefore the same determinations posited as moments of one and the same unity, as determinations which are connections, and which in their unity remain in the unity of existence. Each thus itself contains within it, at the same time, also the moment diverse from it. Being and nothing in their unity, which is existence, are no longer being and nothing. These they are only outside their unity. So in their restless unity, in becoming, they are coming to be and ceasing to be. In the something, being is being in itself. Now, as self-reference, self-equality, being is no longer immediately, but is self-reference only as the non-being of otherness, as existence reflected into itself. The same goes for non-being, as the moment of something in this unity of being and non-being. It is not non-existence in general, but is the other, and more determinedly, according as being is at the same time distinguished from it, it is reference to its non-existence, being for other.
All right, hold on.
Yeah, I thought so.
All right, so I guess that's a key point at the beginning. He says, being and nothing in their unity, which is existence, are no longer being and nothing. These they are only outside their unity. So insofar as we are merely talking about existence in general, we're stuck still with this back and forth which becoming has, in which the distinctions are collapsed. They are each other immediately. So in the restless unity and becoming, they are coming to be and ceasing to be. In the something, being is being in itself. Now, as self-reference, self-equality, being is no longer immediately, but is self-reference only as the non-being of otherness. So, I mean, that's just an example of how the immediate becoming towards the other happens within itself. In being itself, it can only speak of itself within reference to the other, and therefore must necessarily become, this reference, this mediation through the other back to itself. So being can only be being insofar it is not, as it is not nothing.
Yeah. By saying this is this, we're saying this is not these, everything else.
Yeah, so at the point of something, we aren't, we're beyond becoming. We're at the settled point in which being and nothing are now stably distinct. Alright, I think we can continue.
All right. Hence, being in itself is, first, negative reference to non-existence. It has otherness outside it, and is opposed to it. Insofar as something is in itself, it is withdrawn from being other, and being for other. But, second, it has non-being also right in it, for it is itself the non-being of being for other. But being for other is, first, the negation of the simple reference of being to itself, which, in the first place, is supposed to be existence in something. Insofar as something is an other, or for an other, it lacks a being of its own. But second, it is not non-existence as pure nothing. It is non-existence that points to being in itself as its being reflected into itself, just as conversely the being in itself points to being for other.
All right. So in that one, the key point is that being in itself is already way too mediated. It's in order to get being in itself, you have to first have being for other. In fact, to get the immanent speculative move, you would have to first have this othering movement, and then from that, then you can reflect it right back to negate. You have to have the first negation, which is the otherness, then reflect back from that otherness back to being in itself. So in order to have being in itself, you must have being for other first. Even though simultaneously logically you have both these moments at once, you have to, but it seems that in the logical speculation you would have to definitely start with the being for other first in order to get back to being in itself. All right.
Okay. Both moments are determinations of one and the same, namely of something. Something is in itself insofar as it has returned from the being for other back to itself. But something has also a determination or circumstance, whether in itself, here the accent is on the in, or in it. Insofar as this circumstance is in it externally, it is a being for other. This leads to a further determination. Being in itself and being for other are different at first, but that something also has in it what it is in itself, and conversely, is in itself also what it is as being for other. This is the identity of being in itself and being for other, in accordance with the determination that something is itself one and the same something of both moments, and these are in it, therefore undivided. This identity already occurs formally in the sphere of existence, but more explicitly in the treatment of essence and later of the relations of interiority and externality, and in the most determinate form in the treatment of the idea as the unity of concept and actuality. Opinion has it that within the in itself, something lofty is being said, as with the inner, but what something is only in itself is only is also only in it. In itself is a merely abstract, and hence itself external determination. The expressions "there is nothing in it" or "there is something in it" imply, though somewhat obscurely, that what is in a thing also pertains to its in itselfness, to its inner true worth. It may be observed that here we have the meaning of the thing in itself. It is a very simple abstraction, though it was for a while a very important determination, something sophisticated, as it were, just as the proposition that we know nothing of what things are in themselves was a much valued piece of wisdom. Things are called in themselves insofar as abstraction is made from all being for other, which really means insofar as they are thought without all determination as nothing. In this sense, of course, it is impossible to know what the thing in itself is, for the question "what" called for determinations to be produced. But since the things of which the determinations are called for are at the same time presumed to be things in themselves, which means precisely without determination, the impossibility of an answer is thoughtlessly implanted in the question, or else a senseless answer is given. The thing in itself is the same as that absolute of which nothing is known except that in it all is one. What there is in these things in themselves is therefore very well known. They are as such nothing but empty abstractions void of truth. What, however, the thing in itself in truth is, what there basically is in it, Of this, the logic is the exposition. But in this logic, something better is understood by the in itself than an abstraction, namely, what something is in its concept. But this concept is in itself concrete. As concept, in principle conceptually graspable, and as determined, and as the connected whole of its determinations, inherently cognizable.
Okay, that was going over Kant's famous thing in itself. By the way, are you guys still here?
Okay. I know you
Alright,
have a lot to say about this, so go ahead.
this is a heavy paragraph. The whole thing about the thing in itself was that Kant said, well, we only know phenomena, but we don't know how things are in themselves. That is, we only know what things are for us, or rather, here in the Hegelian term, we only know their being for other. Specifically, the being for us as the kind of conscious beings with, sensations and minds that we have. But outside of that, if we try to abstract from how things are for us, we find that we have nothing to say about what they are in themselves because we only know them through their connection to us. When we try to speculate into them without taking this consideration of how they are for us, or for anything else for that matter, we don't have anything to say. So if we strip things in themselves from their being for other, there is nothing left to say about them. The in itself doesn't make sense. There isn't anything in itself without some sort of externality to which we can point to. This isn't just a case of, well, it's a limit of our human experiential minds. No, like, just intelligibly, this does not make sense. If you strip things of all their otherness, there is nothing to even call their innerness.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you can notice this in the obvious distinction. The fact that you distinguish a thing as a shape from its content shows that there is already otherness inherent to it. The form and content are different. The being and then the act of being are two different things of the same thing. You can only ever think about it in this term of self-otherness, which is self-contained. But nonetheless, you need this otherness in order to have the in itself. So another thing is, in just a common conversation, for example, that somebody might say, well, we really don't know what the universe really is. And the easy counter to that is like, well, then what the hell are you? Are you somehow like outside the universe? Are you not part of the universe? Don't you know yourself? Therefore, don't you know something about the universe? Don't you know, aren't you real? Can't you then just obviously say that you know something about what exists in reality? Therefore, you have some connection to the in itself, obviously. Um,
He just means you have to use the logic to explain it.
Somebody asked, what does Hegel mean by "of this the logic is the exposition"? He means that the real meaning of the in itself can only be gotten through his own logical exposition, because his own logical exposition is the only one that has shown, obviously, that the in itself requires the for otherness. Therefore, the in itself has to include this otherness. It cannot be excluded. And what is it that we have found in the logical exposition up to now? We wanted to know we wanted to know being as pure being. What did we find? Well, that even in its immediacy, being has a content. It has an empty content, but we know we make this difference between thought and thinking, form and content. We don't even have to say it, we already do it, and as a matter of fact, we have to do it. Thoughts aren't thoughts if you can't think them. So in order for the thought of being to even be a thought, you've got to be able to think it. There has to be a differentiation between the thought and the thinking. So what is the in itself of thoughts? Well, it's thinking. What is the in itself of being? Well, it was nothing. What was the in itself of nothing and being, in their total movement? It was becoming. What was the in itself of becoming? It was existence. And every time that we stand back and reflect, we can penetrate back in and see something new. We see more and more and more. We keep getting these relations of self-othering and going back in, seeing that this was all part of the inner being of what we started talking about. So, what is the truth of being in itself? Well, that's basically what the whole logic is constructing up. Yes, it's methodological, but it's also metaphysical and intelligible. That how is it that you're going to understand being? Well, you gotta talk about the being of being. That there is no such thing as just being. Whether in thought or in actuality, obviously being is already being. It is already something. In the fact that you claim you have this thought of being, you have to obviously think it. There is an active component which is different from the abstract static component. But that component is obviously part of the actual seemingly static component. Thought necessarily is a thinking. Being necessarily is a being. Existence necessarily is an existent. And something necessarily is an other. Being itself necessarily is also being for other, and being for other necessarily being in itself. These things are what, when we investigate what they are in themselves, we find the other which they deny. And this isn't true just of the logic. This Hegel thinks is true, has to be true of everything. If thought does this, and thought is the only way we understand anything, then this capable self-dynamism of thought has to be something that carries over into the world. It seems rational to consider this. Because if we think that thought is somehow this unique, special being in the world, we'd have to make this distinction, which only thought could grasp, about the static dimensions of being and the dynamic dimensions of being. So, if you take thinking to be this dynamic dimension, well, it's only dynamic because it grasps that there is a static form. But the static form is only graspable in its dynamicity. Sorry if that confused more than helped. I went off on a tangent. Alright, we can continue.
Alright. Being in itself has at first the being for other as a moment standing over against it. But positedness also comes to be positioned over against it, And although in this expression being for other is also included, the expression still contains the determination of the bending back, which has already occurred, of that which is not in itself into that wherein it is positive, and this is its being in itself. Being in itself is normally to be taken as an abstract way of expressing the concept. Positing, strictly speaking, first occurs in the sphere of essence, of objective reflection. The ground posits that which is grounded through it. More strongly, the cause produces an effect, an existence whose subsistence is immediately negated and which carries the meaning that it has its substance, its being, in an other. In the sphere of being, existence only emerges out of becoming. Or again, with the something an other is posited, with the finite an infinite, but the finite does not bring forth the infinite, does not posit it. In the sphere of being, the self-determining of the concept is at first only in itself or implicit, and for that reason it is called a transition or passing over. And the reflecting determinations of being, such as something and other, or finite and infinite, although they essentially point to one another, or are as being for other, also stand on their own qualitatively. The other exists. The finite, like the infinite, is equally to be regarded as an immediate existent that stands firm on its own. The meaning of each appears complete even without its other. The positive and the negative, on the contrary, cause and effect, however much they are taken in isolation, have at the same time no meaning each without the other. The reflective shining in each other, the shine in each of its other, is present right in them. In the different cycles of determination, and especially in the progress of the exposition, or more precisely, in the progress of the concept in the exposition of itself, it is of capital concern always to clearly distinguish what still is in itself or implicitly, and what is posited, how determinations are in the concept, and how they are posited or as existing for other. How they are as posited, or as existing for other. This is a distinction that belongs only to the dialectical development and one unknown to metaphysical philosophizing, to which the critical also belongs. The definitions of metaphysics, like its presuppositions, distinctions, and conclusions, are meant to assert and produce only the existent, and that too as existent in itself.
Okay, one of the important points to get out of that is he told us the distinction between the structures of the logic of essence and the structures of the logic of being. In the logic of essence, you have this positing, which he says, top of 95, the shine in each of its other is present right in them. Positing makes an explicit internal relation between something that posits another thing. Essence posits appearance or existence. Ground posits what it grounds, etc. In the logic of being, we have nothing but an immediate transition. We don't have that being in itself posits being for other. Rather, we have each term supplant the other as its imminent vanishing. We find that in thinking, being in itself, it can only be, intelligible in the distinction with being for others. So being for other is taken as the absolute truth. But then we take being for other and we say, okay, this is the actual truth of things. And we find, no, it actually isn't. It points right back to being in itself. So being in itself is the actual truth of things. And we keep getting these immediate transitions which replace each other as the absolute of what being really is. Being really is being in itself. Being really is being for other. Being really is something. Being is really the finite. Being is really infinite. So we don't immediately, we don't get to these implicit relations between, the finite is posited through the infinite, blah, blah, blah. And it seems here that he's marking metaphysical philosophizing as something that's distinctly caught in the logic of being, which is this immediate supplanting of terms. Where we just want to talk about, what immediately is itself in itself. We want to say God just is this, existence is just that, and we don't talk about this relation between terms. We don't talk about how, they work with each other, immanently. We just kind of posit them as being distinct, and then we relate them to each other because they seem to relate from our external perspective. So, continuing in the unity of the something with itself, being for other is identical with its in itself. The being for other is thus in the something. The determinateness thus reflected into itself is therefore again a simple existent, and hence again a quality determination. So, in going through the moments, we obviously realize, they're existent. So, they're unity. They're a unity of being for other, being in itself. This unity of being for other and being in itself as existent is therefore, this speculative jump back to the form of being, which now is what we call determination. So, this section was actually really hard the first time I read it because he writes it stupidly obtusely. Like, it's funny that even the big commentators comment that this section is not very clear. But if you know how the whole movement style works, it's a lot easier to grasp what it exactly obviously must be. That determination is basically determinate being in itself. Being for other is going to be called constitution, which is determinate. Determinate being for other, which is the unity of being. Determination is basically the affirmative side of this existent form. It's like quality. That's why he says it's hence again a quality. Determination is the reality of being in itself, or the reality of that determination. And constitution is going to be the negation, the existent negation of determination, which is yeah. So that will be explained as we go on. B, determination, constitution, and limit. The in itself, in which the something is reflected into itself from its being for other, no longer is an abstract in itself, but as a negation of its being for other, is mediated through this latter, which is thus its moment. It is not only the immediate identity of the something with itself, but the identity by virtue of which the something also has present in it what it is in itself. The being for other is present in it because the in itself is the sublation of it, is in itself from it. But because it is still abstract and therefore essentially affected with negation, it is equally affected with being for other. We have here not only quality and reality, existence, determinateness, but determinateness existent in itself, therefore determinate determinateness. This is now 3 levels of determinateness that we have. We have existence, determinate being, determinate being. Now we have determinateness of the determinateness of determinate being. And the development consists in positing such determinateness as thus immanently reflected. So keep track of those levels of determinateness. Comes in handy. All right, so if in qualitative being we have determinateness, determinate being. Within determination, we now have determinate being, which is we have the existence of the quality of qualitative being. Because remember that quality itself is determinate. It exists above, general existence. Now determination is the quality of quality, or the determinateness of determinate being. Because it is the unity of being for other. Determination is the unity of being for other and being in itself, in the form of being in itself. So in the form of the positive quality. All right, clear? Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's very clear. All right, just want to make sure, to try to clarify this as much as possible, because it is confusing. He doesn't write it very clearly. So 1, the quality which, in the simple something, is in itself essentially in unity with something's other moment, its being in it, can be named its determination, provided that this word is distinguished in a more precise signification from determinateness in general. Determination is affirmative determinateness, therefore, real quality. It is the in itself by which a something abides in its existence while involved with an other that would determine it, by which it preserves itself in its self-equality, holding on to it in its being for other. Something fulfills its determination to the extent that the further determinateness, which variously accrues to it in the measure of its being in itself, as it relates to another, becomes its filling. Determination implies that what something is in itself is also present in it. So determination is being in itself imbued with its being for other. That is, that it doesn't just shun the other, but rather affirms itself through it. So, the being in itself affirms itself through it, takes in its other, and therefore is determination. Clear? Here also as an author's the translator's footnote, he says bestimung, which is determination. Bestimung, which is also the translator's determination, also carries the meaning of vocation or destiny, as in die Bestimmung des Menschen, the vocation of humankind. Continuing, the determination of the human being, its vocation, is rational thought. Thinking, in general, is his simple determinateness. By it, the human being is distinguished from the brute. He is thinking in himself, insofar as this thinking is distinguished also from his being for other, from his own natural and sensuous being that brings him in immediate association with the other. But thinking is also in him. The human being is himself thinking. He exists as thinking. Thought is his concrete existence and actuality. And further, since thinking is in his existence and his existence is in his thinking is concrete, must be taken as having content and filling. It is rational thought, and as such the determination of the human being. But even this determination is again only in itself, as an ought, that is to say, it is together with the filling embodied in in itself, in the form of an in itself in general, as against the existence which is not embodied in it, but still lies outside confronting it, immediate sensibility in nature. So I think that one is a really confusing paragraph. And maybe it was a great example in his day, but fuck if I really understand what he said. Basically, in general,
What? What do you mean? The human being example?
yeah, like if you read at first, like it's obviously doesn't like it's not that clear. Like the whole vocation thing. If you read it as just like the logical form, well, it makes more sense in that like thinking is the affirmative being of a human being.
Yeah, the vocation is the purpose. So, purpose of the human being as a thinking subject is to think and to think properly. So, rational thought. That's its determinateness because it is determined to do that. Like it I'm trying to think of the word.
I mean, it's weird because you're using an empirical example for. Well, actually, it fits because determination is basically determinate quality. Like you finally said what the quality is. So what is the actual in itself of a human being? You just said, well, obviously human beings are in themselves. Once you finally determine what that in itself is, which is rational thought, then you have the determination of what a human being is.
Yeah.
You know, what is it that actually determines a human being as human being as opposed to the brute? Well, he thinks he's a rational being. You know, he's a rational being as opposed to just his brute biological being. You know, his animal being. But when he says, but thinking is also in him, the human being is himself thinking, he exists as thinking. You take away thinking, and you've taken away something
You're just
essential to the human being.
Yeah.
So you're no longer really a human being. You don't have what actually determines a human being. So the determination is not just the in itself of the human being, it is just as much the human being. It's not something separate from him. You know, it's not just in him, or it's not just within him as like this separate thing. It is really what constitutes him, or rather determines him as the human being. So determinations are basically essential properties. That's how you could think about it. Uh, remember that he talked about the properties right at the end of quality as well, where he also mentioned exactly this, that what we normally consider the essential properties of things is exactly what determinations are. Yeah, Joshua says so something like species being. Yeah, if by what species being you mean like what Marx meant by species being. No, it's close to species being. Determination is not yet essence, but we definitely it's a very close cousin. And when he says, but even this determination is again only in itself as an ought, that is to say, it is, together with a feeling embodied in itself, in the form of an in itself in general as against the existence which is not embodied in it, but still lies outside of confronting it immediately, sensibility and nature. So, thought is, despite being this, this necessary, like the real determination of the human being, nonetheless still has this opposition within it in which it doesn't fully subsume the entirety of the human being. So while it is essential, it doesn't fully explain the full form of the human being. So as opposed to an essence, the determination is different. I guess the distinction could be made that the determination, unlike essence, does not fully imply a unified expression of itself in the whole totality of the human being. Saying, well, the determination of human beings is, rational thought does not tell you about, the shape of the human being, the biological being of it, the emotional aspect of it, the psychical aspect of it, the worldly aspect of it. It separates, the determination from its actual existence, as if the actual existence was something outside of it. And is that clear? I mean, it's on the logical side. I think it's a fine example, but like the first time I read it, we didn't understand what he was talking about. It was really it didn't clarify anything. Actually, it was more confusing than anything. Probably just because of the language differences over time. Like this probably would have been a good example in his own time to people who thought about things this way, but for our time, it's initially more jarring than illuminating. 2. The feeling of the being in itself with determinateness is also distinct from the determinateness which is only being for other and remains outside the determination. For in the sphere of the qualitative, the distinguished terms are left, in their sublated being, also with an immediate qualitative being contrasting them. That which the something has in it thus separates itself, and is from this side the external existence of the something, and also its existence, but not as belonging to its being in itself. Determinateness is thus constitution. So constitution is the determinate being of being for other. Constituted in this or that way, the something is caught up in external influences and in external relationships. This external connection in which the constitution depends and the being determined through an other appear as something accidental, but it is the quality of the something to be given over to this externality and to have a constitution. So if the being in itself is only determinate in the being for other, and the being for other is obviously the same as, the other is also a something, just as something is also the other, then this being for other's relation to determination as well. So constitution is the determinate being for other, which is the relation of one determination as against another determination in an external way. So it's basically the point at which you have to notice the relationship itself exists. That's what the constitution is. So the being for other, which is the relationship of each to the other, itself exists. That is what constitution is. So if
It's the
determinateness,
otherness in
yeah,
itself, outside itself.
yeah. So if you have determination, which we already know that there has to be an other, then that other itself must already also have determination. And since determination is their truth, their real being in itself, then the being for other now is even more determinate. It's not just a being for other, it's the being for other of a determinateness in itself. So that is how it is a determinate being for other, therefore constitution. That clear? Insofar as something alters, the alteration falls on the side of its constitution. The latter is that in the something which becomes an other, the latter is that in the something which becomes an other. The something itself preserves itself in the alteration. The latter affects only this unstable surface of the something's otherness, not its determination. Determination and constitution are thus distinct from each other. Something, according to its determination, is indifferent to its constitution, but that which the something has in it is the middle term of the syllogism connecting the two, determination and constitution. Or rather, the being in the something shows itself to fall apart into these two extremes. The simple middle term is determinateness as such. Its identity belongs to determination just as well to constitution. But determination passes over into constitution on its own, and constitution into determination. This is implied in what has been said. The connection upon closer consideration is this: insofar as that which something is in itself is also in it. The something is affected with being for other. Determination is therefore open, as such, to the relation with the other. Determinateness is at the same time moment, but it contains at the same time the qualitative distinction of being different from being in itself, of being the negative of the something, another existence. This determinateness, which thus holds the other in itself, united with the being in itself, introduces otherness in the latter, or in determination, and determination is thereby reduced to constitution. Conversely, the being for other, isolated as constitution and posited in its own, is in it the same as that which the other as such is in it, the other in it, that is, the other of itself. But it consequently is self-referring existence. Thus being in itself with a determinateness, therefore determination. Notice the way that the relations play out here, remember that something was self-referring existence. And what is it that we get with the other? The explicit self-reference of existence, in which the other is the other of itself. Therefore the other is the other, therefore the something is the other of the other. Therefore, if that is the case, constitution repeats this movement of otherness, and therefore immediately collapses back into determination. Because that's exactly what determination is. It is the being in itself of being in itself. So this, it's interesting how this self-reflexivity of thought plays out. And by the way, that's how you get the positive determinations in this self-referring mode. Sublations happen. At least that's what I've been noticing. So far, I think this plays out such that every time you have a sublation, you notice, if you pay attention, that there is this self-reference. That becoming comes out of the being of being, that is the thinking of thought, as this movement. And then existence comes out of the becoming of becoming, which is again the thinking of the thought, or the thought of the thinking. reversed. The sublations are usually the thought of the thinking, frozen as a new moment. And therefore in existence, we get existence. We get the sublation of qualitative being, which is once again the thought of the thinking. And then we get, the something, which is the thought of the thinking of the otherness moment. And then in determination, we get once again this sublation of the thought of the thinking, which is the determinate constitution, referring to itself. The constitution of constitution is determination. So just another little quirk that you might want to keep in mind if it's helpful. The more you notice these structural relations, sometimes you'll get a spot in which the wording just doesn't seem very clear, but if you then phrase it in what you can expect to necessarily be doing as what you should be thinking through, these forms help you see what Hegel's getting at. They don't replace the thinking that you need to do, but they definitely help you get in line with what Hegel's doing. So, finishing that off, consequently, inasmuch as the two are also to be held apart, constitution, which appears to be grounded in something external, is an other in general, also depends on determination, and the determining from outside is at the same time determined by something's own immanent determination. And further, constitution belongs to that which something is in itself. Something alters along with its constitution. So, big point to get out of that is this whole movement of otherness is not external. It really is part of something. The other is internal to the something, exactly which is what revealed as the other being other to itself. The other of the other came out from the other originally. It came out of itself, and it goes back to itself. It isn't outside itself. So the other is in truth this unity with its other. So when we think we've got two different things, in reality we've found just a movement of one single thing in its own self-othering and return to itself. So, these seemingly external relations which seemed external at first are revealed to really be part of a single movement from within. So this altering of something is no longer the first alteration of something merely in accordance with its being for other. The first was an alteration only implicitly present, one that belonged to the inner concept. Now the alteration is also posited in the something. The something itself is further determined, and negation is posited as immanent to it, as its developed being in itself. The transition of determination and constitution into each other is at first the sublation of their distinction, and existence or something in general is thereby posited. Moreover, since this something in general results from a distinction that also includes qualitative otherness within it, there are two somethings, but these are, with respect to each other, not just others in general, so that this negation would still be abstract and would occur only in the comparison of the two. Rather, the negation is now immanent to the somethings, and existing, they are indifferent to each other, but their affirmation is no longer immediate. Each refers itself to itself through the intermediary of the sublation of the otherness, which in determination is reflected into the in itselfness. Something behaves in this way in relation to the other through itself, since otherness is posited in it as its own movement, its in itselfness holds negation in itself, and it now has its affirmative existence through its intermediary alone. But the other is also qualitatively distinguished from this affirmative existence, and is thus posited outside the something. The negation of its other is only the quality of the something, for it is in the sublation of its other, that it is something. The other, for its part, truly confronts an existence only with this sublation. It confronts the first something only externally, or since the two are in fact inherently joined together, that is, according to their concept, their connectedness consists in this, that existence has passed over into otherness, something into other, that something is just as much an other as the other is. Now, insofar as the in itselfness is the non-being of the otherness that is contained in it, but is at the same time also distinct as existent, something is itself negation, the ceasing to be of an other in it. It is posited as behaving negatively in relation to the other, and in so doing preserving itself. This other, the in itselfness of the something as negation of the negation, is the something's being in itself, and this sublation is as simple negation at the same time in it, namely as its negation of the other something external to it. It is one determinateness of the two somethings that, on the one hand, as negation of the negation, is identical with the in itselfness of the somethings, and also, on the other hand, since these negations are to each other as other somethings, joins them together of their own accord, and, since each negation negates the other, equally separates them. This determinateness is limit. So that was basically Hegel just considered these last two somewhat long paragraphs the big summary of the whole movement of existence up to now. So maybe mark that on your PDF to like look over again, just to get a refresher if you ever need one. Something to notice here is if you looked at my blog on the Universal, you see it right here. Like, it's present here, not fully explicit as the concept, but the structure of the concept is basically fully here. You know, this is the foundation of Hegel's entire logic. You know, this true movement of the real dialectic, in which things self-other themselves, but in self-othering themselves, they are nothing but themselves. You know, things really are this contradictory unity, you know, of themselves and their others. They cannot be any other way. And so, you know, if you like literally just stopped at this second chapter, whether you were aware of it or not, you pretty much have got, if you really understood this whole thing, you've got the key, even though you don't know explicitly like the whole full implications of this key, but you've got the key to the entire corpus of Hegelianism open to you. This is all you need to know in order to start seeing how the movements and every other like work Hegel does, you know, actually works out. You know, literally, this is where me and Hyperion stopped the first time we read it. We stopped at the next section, right at the door of the true infinite. And just with that, just because we grasped at least the essential structure of this, it allowed me, as particularly, to read the phenomenology and catch that structure and see it from the beginning. And once you get that, it's so natural to see what Hegel's doing almost everywhere. I mean, of course, it takes practice. You know, you really have to have understood and grasped this. But once you've grasped it, it's easy mode. As far as like seeing what should be going on and what is going on, obviously, then like working out for yourself, you know, what the explicit movement is the difficult part. But you're not lost for the most part in anything that he's doing. You're capable of finally following and knowing where you should be aiming at, filling in the gaps that he doesn't explicitly tell you. Just to quickly cover, he says this determinateness is limit, going back a bit up top. Now, insofar as the in itselfness is the non-being of the otherness that is contained in it, but is at the same time also distinct as existent, something is itself negation, the ceasing to be of an other. It is posited as behaving negatively in relation to the other, and so doing preserving itself. This other, the in itselfness of the something as negation of the negation, is the something's being in itself, and this sublation is a simple negation at the same time in it, namely, as its negation of the other, something external to it. It is one determinateness of the two somethings that, on the other hand, as negation of the negation, is identical with the in itselfness of the somethings, and also, on the other hand, since these negations are to each other as other somethings, joins them together of their own accord, and since each negation negates the other, equally separates them. This determinateness is limit. So, I think this should be understood that constitution, taken in unity with determination, is what limit is. That determination is against determination only through its as its constitution, and constitution is only against determination as determination, as a determination othered against determination. So the other negating itself as an other. If that makes sense. I don't know. Let's read on to 3 and see if it fully fleshes out. So I think I got that right, though. Limit is the sublation of the unity of determination and constitution. Being for other 3. Being for other is indeterminate, affirmative association of something with its other. In limit, the non-being for other is emphasized. The qualitative negation of the other, which is thereby kept out of the something that is reflection into itself. We must see the development of this concept, a development that will rather look like confusion and contradiction. Contradiction immediately raises its head because limit, as an internally reflected negation of something, ideally holds in it the moments of something and other, and these, as distinct moments, are at the same time posited in the sphere of existence as really qualitatively distinct. So translate that into the simple form, which is exactly what I said about it earlier. The determinateness of determinate being. The existence of the existence of the existence, which is obviously requires the existence of the distinction. So limit here is the unity of determination and constitution in the form of being, which is determinateness itself. Always keep that in mind. What is that? Is that alpha? Is that how you say it? Hyperion?
Yeah.
Is that simple? Is that alpha?
The A, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't know my Greek, man.
Yeah. The big looking B is beta.
So, continuing, something is therefore immediate, self-referring existence, and at first it has a limit with respect to an other. So, just a small comment on how, the dialectical, Hegel's method works is notice that every time that we've come up with something new, what do we do with it? The way we think about it is, one, we know what it is, and if we can't think through it, then we at least have something new to do with it, which is we add it to the jumble of everything else that we already have. Because why not? We have everything that we've thought up to now is free game. If you can relate any concept that we've thought up to now back to something we've already developed, do it. You know, if you don't know, if you were doing something like this originally yourself, that's the only thing you could do. And it would be, it's totally logically legitimate. It's openly allowed, and you should do everything that you can to think. So something is therefore immediate, self-referring existence, and at first it has a limit with respect to an other. Limit is the non-being of the other, not of the something itself. In limit, something marks a boundary of its other. But other is itself as something in general. But other is itself a something in general. The limit that something has with respect to an other is therefore also the limit of the other as a something. It is the limit of this something in virtue of which the something holds the first something as its other away from itself, or is a non-being of that something. The limit is thus not only the non-being of the other, but the one something but of the one something just as of the other, and consequently of the something in general. So, limit is the real other of the other now. You know, it's the other of the others. So we got a whole triad going on here now. But the limit is equally essentially the non-being of the other. Thus, through its limit, something is at the same time is. In limiting, something is of course thereby reduced to being limited itself. But as the seizing of the other in it, its limit is at the same time itself only the being of the something. This something is what it is by virtue of it, has its quality in it. This relation is the external appearance of the fact that limit is simple negation of the first. That limit is the simple negation or the first negation, whereas the other is at the same time the negation of the negation, the in itselfness of the something. So, taking into account what we've done up to now and known, about how the something and the other relate, self-otherness. So the limit is equally essentially the non-being of the other. Thus, through its limit, something at the same time is, because it's, the force that keeps the other out and allows the something to be. In limiting, something is of course thereby reduced to being limited itself. But as the seizing of the other in it, its limit is at the same time itself only the being of the something. So once again, something is in virtue of its limit, which is strange. You would have thought that the limit would be in virtue of the something. This something is what it is by virtue of it, has its quality in it. So you would have thought that the limit would be in the something, but now it's the something in the limit. This relation is the external appearance of the fact that limit is simple negation or the first negation, whereas the other is at the same time the negation of the negation, the in itselfness of the something. So limit here, I think, is appearing as the first negation, as simply it first appears to us as the sheer stop of the other, rather than the negation of the negation. But it is just like something was immediately just the mere negation of the other. It revealed itself ultimately to be the negation of the negation. Something as an immediate existence is therefore the limit with respect to another something, but it has this limit in it, and is something through the mediation of that limit, which is just as much its non-being. The limit is the mediation in virtue of which something and other each both is and is not. So, notice something? Anybody notice a certain other concept that has this specific structure? It's becoming. So limit is now another version of becoming, in which in limit something is and is as much not, right there. It's other and itself. Just how in becoming being is and as much as not, being a nothing. It's the immanent connection, which when you think of the limit, you can't just think of the limit. You immediately are cast out of just the pure limit itself. There is no limit in itself. Like it has to become, just like becoming. It has to immediately point right back to something and other. Just an interesting structural relation right there. Just to show you how things repeat at so-called higher levels in the logic. But I mean, obviously the interesting thing to note is obviously this repetition is organic. We don't have to force it, and we don't have to say, oh, by the way, here's becoming. We're going to bring in some becoming to make sense of this. No, it naturally happened. It naturally repeats, just freely of its own logic. So beta. Now, insofar as something in its limit both is and is not, and these moments are an immediate qualitative distinction, the non-existence and the existence of something fall outside each other. Something has its existence outside its limit, or as representation would also have it, inside it. In the same way the other two, since it is something, has in the same way the other two, since it is something, has it outside it. The limit is the middle point between the two at which they leave off. They have existence beyond each other, beyond their limit. The limit, as the non-being of each, is the other of both. So, it's the point of their immanent contact, but also their immanent exclusion. It is in accordance with this difference of the something from its limit, the line appears as line outside its limit, the point. The plane as plane outside the line, the solid as solid only outside its limiting plane. This is the aspect of the limit that first occurs to figurative representation. The self-external being of the concept, and is also most commonly assumed in the context of spatial objects. It's a interesting connection right there. If you remember the nightmare or the shit show that was, high school geometry, or maybe you took it in middle school. I sucked at it, but boy, I sure remember limits. I hated them. Also in calculus. Limits are very important for math. What's that sign? Hyperion, what is
Beta.
it? No, the other one. It looks like a Y.
Oh shit. I forgot.
Well, look it up. You're supposed to be my more cultured friend who knows these things.
Yeah, but I haven't taken Greek.
You talked to Ego Waffles. He was reading Greek.
Yeah, but he's, yeah, I guess so. He can read Greek, though.
Alright, Gamma.
I don't know. I can't find it. Oh, is it Gamma? Okay, yeah. That's what I was thinking, but I knew it wasn't Upsilon because I thought it was Upsilon before and I was wrong.
Alright, so continuing. But further, something as it is outside the limit, as the unlimited something, is only existence in general. As such, it is not distinguished from its other. It is only existence, and therefore it and its other have the same determination. Each is only something in general, or each is other. And so both are the same. An indistinguishable, indeterminate determinateness. Notice how everything just, easily just falls right back. You get rid of limit, and everything that has been built up in limit, and you go right back to existence in general, which is nothing but the indeterminate being as such. The being in which we can't differentiate fuck all about anything. But this, their at first immediate existence, is now posited in them as limit. In it both are what they are, distinct from each other, but it is also equally their common distinguishedness, the unity in their distinguishedness of both, just like existence and just like becoming as well. This double identity of the two, existence and limit, contains this, that something has existence only in limit, and that, since limit and immediate existence are each at the same time the negative of each other, the something which is now only in its limit equally separates itself from itself, points beyond itself to its non-being, and declares it to be its being, and so it passes over into it. To apply this to the preceding example, the one determination is this, that something is what it is only in its limit. Therefore, the point is the limit of a line, not because the latter ceases at the point and has existence outside it. The line is the limit of plane, not because the plane just sees it at it, and the same goes for the plane as the limit of solid. Rather, at the point the line also begins, the point is its absolute beginning, and if the line is represented as unlimited on both its two sides, or, as is said, as extended to infinity, the point still constitutes its element, just as the line constitutes the element of the plane, and the plane that of the solid. These limits are the principle of that which they delimit, just as one, for instance, is as hundredth the limit, but also the element of the whole hundred. So things are only because of their limits. You need the limits to start getting anything. And as opposed to, the thing he said right before that, in that little chunk about how something, in being delimited, equally separates itself from itself, points beyond itself to its non-being, and declares it to be its being, and so passes over into it. What does that describe? Exactly the explanation of how something and how being and nothing could be differentiated. How did it happen? Well, being nothinged itself. Why was nothing another being? Because that was the result of the negation. The nothingness was actually this operation of negation, this relation that happens between, the activity of being with itself, and being itself. Thought splits into thoughts through thinking. It's pretty amazing. And thinking is nothing but the being of thought. It's, you see how, everything that we build up reflects right back to the beginning and tells us something more about how it was possible? All right, we'll head to the end of limit right here and stop it. That's a nice place to stop, by the way, because once I think that gets us to the finite. That's a good place to start next time. Could you read Hyperion?
Yeah, where are we?
The other determination is.
That's what I thought. Alright. The other determination is the unrest of the something in its limit, in which it is immanent, the contradiction that propels it beyond itself. Thus the point is this dialectic of itself becoming line, the line, the dialectic of becoming plane, the plane of becoming total space. A second definition is given of line, plane, and whole space, which has the line come to be through the movement of the point, the plane through the movement of the line, and so forth. This
Just to wait, what?
movement, the point,
Just
yeah,
let me clarify something. Like when he says a dialectic, the dialectic is obviously the self-contradiction or the self-othering. Yeah, what he said. That's the point of this dialectic is of becoming line. The line, the dialectic of becoming plane. What is a plane? It's a line outside a line. It's a line that isn't a line. You know, a line opposed to a line. Notice how that works. So, just an interesting thing. You know, it's always interesting to notice those things. I think like that actually is something that helps you think through the way that sublations work, and explains why sublations are these reflexive self-references, and why it makes total sense that they be such. And actually, I have a blog that I started writing about this. I'm like, if you really like wanted to be like true to the method and say, yeah, the method is fully dialectical, if you meant by that this, what I just said about how like this self-othering thing works, you know, clearly it's self-oppositional, then you would be totally right and legit in saying the whole method really is nothing but dialectics.
mm-hmm.
But that's not what most people mean.
Alright. This movement of the point, the line, and so forth, is however viewed as something accidental, or as movement only in figurative representation. In fact, however, this view is taken back by supposing that the determinations from which the line and so forth originate are their elements and principles, and these are, at the same time, nothing else but their limits. The coming to be is not considered as accidental, or only as represented. That the point, the line, the plane are per se self-contradictory beginnings, which on their own repel themselves from themselves, and consequently that the point passes over from itself into the line, through its concept, moves in itself, and makes the line come to be, and so on. All this lies in the concept of the limit which is immanent in the thing, or in the something. The application itself, however, belongs to the treatment of space. As an indication of it here, we can say that the point is the totally abstract limit, but in a determinate existence, this existence is still taken in total abstraction. It is the so-called absolute, that is, abstract space, the absolutely continuous being outside one another. Inasmuch as the limit is not abstract negation, but is rather in this existence, inasmuch as it is spatial determination, the point is spatial, is the contradiction of abstract negation and continuity, and is, for that reason, the transition as it occurs, and has already occurred into the line, and so forth. And so there is no point, just as there is no line or plane. The something, posited with its immanent limit as the contradiction of itself, by virtue of which it is directed and driven out and beyond itself, is the finite.
Alright, that's where we leave it. Any questions, Josh? Yeah. This was actually pretty clear and pretty simple once we nailed the beginning down.
Yeah.
Like it's just simple, reflections, reflections, reflections. All right, so see you next week. Mull over this, and I don't know. One of the things you can do is just like see how this works in other things, Josh. Like I wouldn't like bother going like, oh, well, I'm gonna go read like something, see, like try to find the dialectics. I think you find them. You read stuff, and eventually, one day it just pops in your head like, wow, that's exactly like that. So, all right. Thanks for showing up.